Okay, and I think we're live. In this live stream, I'm going to address some of the biggest frustrations that I get feedback from some of the people that fill out our survey on our mailing list. So we have a mailing list that you can subscribe to if you click on the link that's in the description of this video. And as part of that mailing list, we ask people who sign up to fill out a quick survey. And one of the questions in that survey is, what is your biggest frustration as a programmer? So in this live stream, I'm going to go through some of the main themes that I see in the feedback that we get, as well as some specific questions that we've had from individuals through the mailing list and through email and various other channels. So I've picked the top 5 kind of themes that I see a lot of people asking questions about. And I'm going to go through them first, one by one, and I'm going to explain a bit how I relate to the frustration and also some of my solutions that I put in to try and overcome them. Okay, so the number one theme that I seem to get feedback from is about not having enough time. So I think this is a problem that most people can relate to in programming and in other fields, but a big issue is that you feel like you don't have enough time to do all the things that you need to do for work, or you don't have enough time to implement your own projects and your own ideas, and it can be a bit frustrating, and I've certainly been there many times. We try and do things like regular content on this channel, regular blog posts, things like that, and it does get quite frustrating because it feels like you never have enough time to do everything that you want to do. So my number one advice for not having enough time, and something that I find personally helpful, is just to prioritize the things that are important versus the things that are urgent. So I think this is some advice that I got from Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek book. And it basically means you have some tasks that you think are super urgent, that you think need to be done now, actually don't need to be done now or are not that important. And some tasks that are really important don't actually need to be done immediately. So basically it's just prioritizing the work that you have and trying to figure out what's urgent and what's important. So one common mistake that people do, and that I've done in the past many times, is prioritizing email and other forms of communication and notifications over tasks that you're currently focusing on. So email is usually not that important, even if you're working in a company. Usually emails can wait. They can wait a few hours or even days in some cases to respond to them. So I think one of the most productive things that I do is to just turn email off completely. So I basically I don't have email notifications anywhere. I don't have email pop-ups on my phone or my desktop or whatever. I just check email when I allocate time to do that, and I try and batch it out all in one go. So also try and not do things like that in the morning. The mornings tend to be more productive because after you wake up, you're fresher and you're, you don't have as many distractions because there's not that many people about the earlier it is. So try and leave emails to later on in the day and allocate a specific time to actually go through and answer all the emails. The next piece of advice is to avoid social media. Now, this is a common thing that I suffer with all the time, is basically being addicted to checking Facebook and checking LinkedIn and checking all these other social media channels. The best thing I find for this is to basically figure a way to completely block these channels from your computer. Like you're a child in school or something like that. You want to basically maybe modify your host file or do something that allows you to actually block Facebook or various different social media channels during the day while you're working. And that's quite helpful because sometimes you can kind of check it as a habit and you're not actually consciously doing it. You just kind of type in Facebook in the browser, and then before you know it, you're on Facebook and you're browsing things that are basically wasting time. So while you're trying to focus on a task, you can basically figure a way to block Facebook. There's a good extension in Chrome called the Newsfeed Eradicator, which basically just blocks out the newsfeed while you're on Facebook, so you can still use messages and that, but you don't see all the kind of distracting newsfeed content. Another thing that I found useful is there's an app that if you're an if you're an Android user, then you can install the app called Quality Time. And what this app does is it tracks what you are looking at on your phone, and it tells you exactly how many hours you spend looking at the different apps and doing different things on your phone. This is useful because it allows you to see what you're spending most of your time doing on your phone. And a lot of the time you can see, that you spent 2 hours on Facebook or Instagram or something that wasn't quite productive. And it helps you kind of become conscious of how much time we actually do spend on our phones. And oops, I've been signed out of my questions. So yeah, basically installing Quality Time if you're an Android user is really helpful because it lets you kind of analyze the different apps that you use and spend most of your time on the phone. So you can, maybe uninstall different apps and things like that if you find that they're wasting too much time. Finally, another good thing for help with not having enough time to do things is what is called the Pomodoro technique. So you can look up this technique, and it's basically a technique where you do 25 minutes of just focusing on a specific task and then a 5-minute break, and then you do another 25 minutes. And there's different apps and extensions and things that you can get, timers that you can install on your computer that can help with this. So that's called the Pomodoro technique, and it really helps you kind of keep focused for set periods of time, 25 minutes, and then you take a break and then you focus intensely for another 25 minutes. And I find that really helpful. I usually use that on a daily basis. All right, the next most common theme of questions that we got in our feedback form was finding work as a developer. Now, this, to me, hasn't been a problem for a while, fortunately, because I live in London where there's quite a high demand for developers, but this may not be the case in other places of the world, or it may depend on how much experience you have and how much work you have public. So I think the number one thing that you can do to help improve your chances of finding work is to make sure that you have a public portfolio of your work on GitHub or on a website or something like that. So it's really about demonstrating that you have lots of experience or that you've built lots of things and showing actual tangible outcomes or outputs of work that you've done in the past. So this could be actually writing applications that you make open source and put on GitHub. It could be creating actual products or tools that you use that you put on the App Store or build a website. Anything that basically can demonstrate your skills as a developer, because then you can use these examples when you're searching for work, and it will help increase your chances, and it will make you more attractive to employers because they can see that you actually have a portfolio of work. The next piece of advice would be to make sure that you have good communication skills. Now, this is something that from my experience, is fairly rare in the development world. There's lots of people that have lots of different experience and maybe excellent developers, but they may not have great communication skills. And it doesn't have to be like really advanced stuff, or it's just simple things like making sure you have good written skills, making sure emails are formed well when you're speaking to recruiters and potential employers, making sure that your CV is completely free of any grammatical errors or typos or spelling mistakes. That is a really big one. When I've been hiring developers in previous roles in the past, I find that it's astounding how many people will send CVs that have spelling errors and typos and things like that. And that is just an immediate red flag for any employer, because it just demonstrates that you're not really serious and that you're not really, don't have good attention to detail and things like that. So make sure your communication skills are good through email. Make sure your CV is free of errors. Make sure your LinkedIn is fully up to date with all of your experience. Go and make sure use LinkedIn as basically the new CV. I find that a lot of recruiters contact me through LinkedIn every day based on the content that I have on my LinkedIn profile. So again, same as your CV, make sure that all of your LinkedIn descriptions and everything is free of any typos or grammatical errors, and just make sure it's all clean and looks presentable. Another piece of advice for looking for work is be friendly to recruiters. Now, I know a lot of people get frustrated with the recruiters because you can get lots of calls if you're a programmer in a city like London or a different place where there's a high demand. You may get lots of calls from recruiters and they may be contacting you about jobs that are not appropriate or don't fit your skills and things like that. But just basically be friendly to them. They're just doing their job. They're trying to do the best that they can. And they are basically the gateway to some of the best jobs in the market. So if you work with them, they will work hard to make sure they find you a good job because they get paid for doing that, basically. So it's always good to be positive and don't send rude emails back to recruiters and things like that. Don't publicly share things on LinkedIn about how much they annoy you, because they do a good job most of the time. In my experience, I've had lots of good experiences with recruiters, and basically all the roles that I've ever had have been through recruiters. Finally, if you are stuck for work still, you can look on websites like Upwork and Freelancer, and the downside of these websites is you usually need to start small and you need to probably undercharge a bit for some work, but just to get kind of good reviews and good feedback. But once you get some good reviews and good feedback, you can do quite well on those websites. Okay, so the third most common frustration theme that I got was around the fast pace of technology and the fact that you learn something new and then you feel like within a year, or even some cases months, that technology is obsolete. And it's just because technology is such a fast-paced thing, it moves so quickly, particularly on the JavaScript side, like the front-end frameworks and things like that. You find that there's new ones coming up all the time. So I think my number one advice for this is just to accept this as the reality of working in technology. Technology moves fast. You need to stay on top of it, and part of being a developer is understanding that you're going to be constantly learning new things. You're going to be constantly having to swap technologies and learn different things. And I would suggest, instead of focusing on learning a specific technology, focus on, or look at it from the point of view that you are learning how to learn new things. So because technology moves fast, it's just a reality in programming. It's more about being able to pick up things quickly and learn things quickly, as opposed to being able to master a particular technology. Now, what I mean by this is that you basically, a lot of the technologies, yes, they are different and new ones come out, but the fundamental principles behind a lot of them are the same. So the more that you learn the technologies, the more that you'll find you're able to pick up new things. So instead of being frustrated about a new technology coming out, I would suggest go ahead, start learning it, and eventually you'll find that you can pick up things really quickly. Like, for example, I picked up Python pretty quickly, coming from PHP background. It's, they're very different languages, but there's also a lot of similarities. And a lot of it is more about figuring out how to figure things out, as opposed to being able to master everything. My final piece of advice for dealing with fast-paced technologies is maybe work on higher level languages like Python and JavaScript, because yes, there's lots of JavaScript frameworks come out all the time, but if you focus on the kind of core language JavaScript, then it should be easier to pick up these new frameworks as they come out. All right, so the next common theme, the fourth item on my list, is finding solutions to programming problems and bugs. Lots of people answered the survey expressing their frustration with finding solutions to problems and bugs. And I would suggest this is just part of the role of being a software developer. You're basically, if you may think that you're paid to create new applications and to build new things, and that is mostly true. However, another big part of being a programmer is you're simply there to just figure out problems, find solutions to problems, and fix bugs a lot of the time. So, any software that's ever built has bugs in it. There's no such thing as a bug-free application. There may be close to it, but there is not one single application that will be entirely bug-free, because you can't predict all the outputs and inputs all of the time. So there's always going to be bugs. So part of being a programmer is just to understand that you're going to be constantly fixing bugs. One way that really helps me fix bugs and has been extremely useful in the past is using Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is a question and answer site that allows you to ask very specific programming questions and give examples. And in my experience, I find that within a few minutes, most of the time, someone responds to a question and basically answers it for me. And as a reward for that, they get points and they get to build up their Stack Overflow profile. So I would suggest both asking questions on Stack Overflow and answering questions on Stack Overflow. So again, similar to dealing with the fast pace of technology, part of finding solutions to bugs and things like that is not about fixing the specific bugs, but learning the techniques used to fix bugs in general. So the more that you practice fixing bugs and identifying issues, the more that you'll be able to, the quicker that you'll be able to do these in your own projects. So if you help other people fixing bugs and you answer other people's questions, that's excellent practice for you to go and learn new things and practice fixing bugs that will help you be able to do it quicker yourself. Another piece of advice for fixing bugs and finding solutions to problems is you can master the debugging tools. So if your language has a debugging tool, if it's JavaScript, then you can use the Chrome debugging tool or the one that comes with Firefox. If it's Python, you can use the Python debugger. Learn how to use the Python debugger or the debugging tool for your programming language, because that will really save you a lot of time when it comes to fixing bugs. I spent a lot of time kind of procrastinating learning the actual debugger tool, thinking, oh, I don't have time to learn the tool because I need to focus my time on fixing this bug. But that turns out to be kind of counterproductive, because really you can fix bugs 10 times faster if you learn how to use the debugging tool effectively. Next piece of advice is that you could ask questions in the IRC channel for the technologies. Python, IRC is Internet Relay Chat, and it's kind of an outdated technology now. However, it is still very popular amongst some of the more old school, who tend to be the most experienced developers, particularly for languages like Python and frameworks like Django. I find that the IRC people are just amazingly, they're always really helpful. They're really happy to help you as long as you have a good attitude towards asking them a question. So you have to understand they're not there just to answer questions for you. They're taking time out of their day to help you with an answer. So you need to treat them with respect. I've seen lots of people go on IRC channel and be like, why is no one answering my damn question? I need an answer now, and kind of getting annoyed at people not answering. But it's like they're not obliged to answer your question. They can choose to answer your question, and in a lot of times, if you have a good attitude, they will choose to answer the question and they'll answer it well for you. And finally, I would just accept that constantly handling problems and dealing with bugs is just part of being a programmer. So once you accept that, it kind of becomes easier to deal with. The final kind of high level feedback that we got of one of the frustrations is coming up with ideas for sample projects when learning programming. So coming up with ideas is often a frustration many people have. I particularly am faced with this a lot of the time because I do a lot of tutorials and a lot of things online, and it can be quite challenging sometimes to think of an idea that of a sample project that you can make for somebody to use, so that you can teach the language. And you get the same kind of frustration when learning a language. If you're thinking of ideas and things that you want to help you learn, you obviously don't want something that's too complicated, that will be too challenging, but also you don't want something too easy. And a lot of the examples online are like Hello World projects and things like that. My suggestion for this is to keep a central location for storing ideas. So I often have these random ideas of little tiny projects that I think could improve my time and I come up with these ideas at inconvenient times, like maybe while I'm cleaning the dishes or something like that. So my advice would be to keep a location like a Google Doc or a Google Keep note or something like that you can just constantly add these little ideas to, so you can kind of build a repository of your own ideas that you can then look to anytime that you are looking to develop or learn something, you can just go to your ideas, and maybe there's something that you had an idea for months ago that all of a sudden you're like, oh, I could do this with this new framework that I'm learning or this new language that I'm learning. And that is a good way of keeping things, of keeping fresh ideas for you to work on. Another piece of advice would be to think of things that would help save you time or money. So one example that I had is a project that I started called Clippy.rocks. You can access it at Clippy.rocks. It's actually a web domain. Rocks is a new top-level domain, so you can just go to Clippy.rocks. And basically, my frustration was that I was getting annoyed with having to send clipboard content to my phone when I was working with mobile development. So, for example, I needed to paste a new API URL into a app in debug mode on my Android phone, and I was getting annoyed at kind of the tedious task of typing out http:// on the mobile phone, because the mobile keyboard input isn't always designed to input. It's designed for communication. It's not designed for inputting URLs and secret keys and things like that into apps when you're debugging as a programmer. So I developed a simple app that just runs on my Android phone that gives me a web browser interface on the web front end, and I can just send content directly to my Android phone's clipboard. And at the time, this was really helpful. It really helped me with my job. So I just thought, you know, there was nothing like this available at the time, so I just built it. And it's kind of an example that I use when I'm searching for jobs, and it's something that I can give to employers to say this is an example of work that I've done in the past. Okay, so that is the kind of 5 high-level biggest frustrations that people deal with in the feedback that they gave us. Now I'm going to move on to some of the actual responses. So I've taken some examples of actual questions and responses that people gave to the question, and I'll give a bit of advice and try and answer these questions as best I can. So the first one I have is from somebody called Olivia, a front-end developer, and the question goes, or the frustration goes, getting a junior/entry level job to kickstart my new career. There are loads of jobs, but none if you have less than 1 year of commercial experience, or if you don't have a computer science degree. So this is kind of similar to the not being able to find work as a developer, but I'll answer it particularly for any new developers. So someone that's just joining into programming, or they've maybe they've started getting a little bit of experience and they think that they're ready to take on real work projects. So my advice for this would be if you're in an existing job and you want to start getting into programming, then see if there's a way where you can apply your programming in that existing work. So for example, I was working at a company previously before I was doing a software developer role. I was working as a project coordinator, kind of like a project manager, where I did management of video conference units and things like that. But I also was interested in programming, and even though my role wasn't particularly focused on programming, I found a way that I could make my day-to-day role easier by writing a simple application that allowed me to kind of manage these video conference units and perform some automated tasks on them that saved me a lot of time. So my boss was completely happy with this, because if it saves me time, then it allows me to work on other things. And it also gave me a bit of experience into programming and some experience in programming in a kind of commercial environment that I can then use on my CV if I ever wanted to look for a professional, a full-time programming role. The next part of that question is about having a computer science degree. I have a computer systems degree focused in networking, where I did a bit of programming, but if I was to be completely honest, the degree in itself doesn't really help with finding roles. I find that in the modern, like today, when looking for roles, very rarely do I ever need to produce evidence of a degree. Very rarely do people ask. They're more interested in my actual experience, either with other companies. And if you don't have any actual experience with other companies, then you can give your experience through projects that you have on GitHub, projects that you have online, different things that you create. So My advice, if you're just starting out and you want to get into programming, start building things and putting them online. Just share your work, contribute to open source projects, do anything that you can have publicly viewable, accessible work, and just keep working on that. And eventually, once you have a strong enough portfolio, you will find an employer who is willing to take you on, even though you don't have any commercial experience. But first of all, understand that if you don't have any commercial experience, or you're new to programming and you've only been in it for let's say a few months, less than a year, you may need to start at a pretty entry-level job, a junior role. But if you focus and you work hard and you have a good attitude, you can move up quite quickly. So within a few years, you can be at a senior level, as long as you're constantly learning and constantly improving your skills and you have a good attitude. The next question is from somebody called James, who is a college lecturer. So this is a question on their on our survey, and they put their biggest frustration as being asked too many questions. So I don't know whether this was a dig at the questions on the survey. I don't know whether they were making a joke here, or whether they are being serious. And because they're a college lecturer, they probably have lots of students asking them questions. I would suggest, so I have an online course about building a backend on Udemy, and I get asked questions all the time. And I am also a member of the Udemy Instructors Club Facebook group, and I see lots of people with similar frustrations to this, complaining about being asked too many questions. My advice would be just to embrace being asked questions and just try and answer the questions as best you can, and look at it from a perspective of it's helping you learn how to improve at this technology as well. So I've been asked many questions on Udemy by students, and by them asking a question, it's made me realize different things and made me learn new things and new ways of doing things to be able to answer their question effectively. Now, yes, it does take a lot of my time, but that time is valuable learning experience for me, as well as for the person I'm answering the question for. So I think being asked questions, it's more of an attitude you have towards it. I've certainly had the attitude in the past when I've been asked lots of questions on my blog or things like that. I've certainly been frustrated, thinking that it's kind of taking up too much of my time or something like that. But then I started looking at it as it's beneficial for me, as well as beneficial for the person asking the question, because I get to improve on my skills and sharpen my knowledge, as well as help somebody else. So it's just putting positive stuff out there, and it's looking at it from the perspective where it's beneficial for both of us, as opposed to just beneficial to the person asking the question. The next biggest frustration that I have is from somebody called Maria, who is a mobile app developer. And their biggest frustration is not having a Mac of my own to properly learn iOS Swift. So yeah, this is a big problem. Apple only allow you to develop iOS apps on a Mac, and this is a problem for me, because previously I wanted to learn, back when they used Objective-C, I wanted to learn how to build iOS apps, and I don't have full-time access to a Mac, because I don't use a Mac for my main work laptop. I use a Linux-based machine. I would suggest there's two kind of, there's only so much you can do here, because these are technological restrictions. I believe that Swift you can now run on Linux. So I think that with new versions of Swift, I haven't done much Swift, as a disclaimer, so I'm not probably the best person to answer about this. But I think Swift you can now run on Linux, particularly the backend Swift language. I think it's called Vapor. There's like a framework that allows you to write backend programs with Swift. I believe you can write that on Linux. If not, then you may want to consider taking up something like React Native and building iOS apps with JavaScript. You can also do it with another framework called Ionic Framework, which is based on Angular. So you can build apps for both Android and iOS using those technologies. And that may be the best workaround for this problem, because if you don't have a Mac, you're going to have difficulty developing iOS applications. The next biggest frustration response I have is from somebody called Anand, who is a business analyst. And they say, I have been longing to make it big in programming for quite some time now. So far, whatever I am in this field, I have been self-made. Finding an interesting project that fits for a week is something I really want to pursue, but I find myself out of ideas, perhaps. Okay, so I think they're asking, they have been into programming for some time, but they're having difficulty finding kind of smaller projects that help them to learn and help them to create example things and practice their skills. Now, my two parts of feedback that I would give about this. One is that, again, going back to one of the higher level ones of coming up with ideas, I would keep a list that you can just constantly add to every time you have an idea, and then you could sort them by complexity maybe, and you can basically have a backlog of things that allow you to a kind of a pool of ideas that you come up with, and you just keep adding to it. And then whenever you're looking for some time to develop something simple, you can then address that list and take something from it. Another piece of advice would be, sometimes if you have an idea, it may be quite a big idea, and it may be that it's quite a technologically challenging idea that could take months or years to develop, but it may only take a week or less to come up with what's called a minimum viable product. So a minimum viable product, or an MVP, is just the most basic version of the app that adds the value in the area that you're trying to create. So you may have, the idea may be big, but just to create a small, simple, minimum viable product, a basic use case for the app idea may only take a week or two, so you can work on that. Another bit of advice for that is, maybe I constantly get people coming to me with ideas, constantly non-technical people come to me all the time wanting to develop their idea. And unfortunately, I don't have enough capacity to help everyone with their ideas. And I have lots of different ideas of myself that I want to develop. And I always feel that I'm not able to help people with their ideas. But if you're looking for ideas and you want to basically just practice your skills, and maybe you can ask non-developers if they have any ideas of apps that they might find useful or something like that, and help build them a minimum viable product of that app that you can then get done in a week or build quickly. If you're looking for paid work, then a good place for quick short-term projects is Upwork and freelancer.com and these other sites like Elance. I haven't personally used any of these myself because I'm kind of, at the moment, so far I've been consistently in a freelance role for a company in London. But if I was looking for short-term projects like that, I would reach out to those sites. There's lots of people on there willing to pay to have small ideas created or small little scripts and things built that you can help them with. All right, so the next question I have is from somebody called Ed, a back-end developer, and their frustration is poorly written code causing runtime bugs. Okay, so this may be, it's not clear whether this is their own code that is poorly written and causing bugs, or whether they're working with other people's code that is poorly written. One piece of advice for helping reduce the amount of poorly written code is something called peer reviews. Peer reviews is a technique that is used in professional programming where every change that is made to an application is reviewed by a peer at the same level of the developer. Or they don't have to be the same level, they can actually be even junior, or they can be more senior. But basically, someone else in the team reviews every piece of code that is written before it is merged into the main code base. The benefit of this, and at first it sounds like it's a bit kind of big brotherish, and some people may be resistant because they don't want other people judging their work or giving negative feedback or things like that, or they may feel inferior to other developers, and they may feel that they may not be able to do as good a job, and that this may be a problem with the peer reviews. But my suggestion would be, look at it from the attitude of peer reviews just simply helps you improve on your skills. So other developers have different experiences. They've looked at things from different perspectives. It's impossible for anyone to know everything about any particular technology or programming language. So there's always more to learn. Nobody knows absolutely everything, and nobody is expected to know absolutely everything. So sometimes it may feel like the project manager expects you to know every part of a technology. This is simply not possible. There's no way that you can learn everything. So getting experience and getting someone else, to another programmer, to review your code is an excellent way for them to give their feedback based on the experiences they have. So there may be things that you know that they don't know, and there may be things that they know that you don't know. And having the peer review process in place really helps improve the quality of the code, because firstly, you're writing the code knowing that somebody else is going to look at this code, and it's not just going to be committed and then used in production. Somebody else is going to look through it and scrutinize the code and find ways that it can be improved. Secondly, it helps identify bugs. Pretty much at the place where I work now, we do peer reviews, and on more or less every single peer review, the peer reviewer finds at least one bug or one improvement that could be made to the code. And if you think about if we didn't have peer reviews, then those bugs and those improvements would never be fixed or never be implemented into the code that's being deployed into production, because they were never peer reviewed. It's not, you don't, by not peer reviewing, you're just missing out on all of those core bugs and all of those core improvements that you could potentially make to the code. So peer reviews is a great way to improve poorly written code or prevent poorly written code from entering the code base. The other thing that is really useful that people don't do enough of, and even I don't do enough of, and I'm a huge advocate of it, is test-driven development, or just writing unit tests in general. I try my best, and I'm trying to be more and more disciplined about this, but I try and do everything with test-driven development. So that means you write unit tests for the code, you run the unit test and it fails, and then you write the code to make that unit test pass. So this helps improve the structure of your code, because you're writing code that is easily testable, because you have to, because you're writing the code to fix the test. It helps with actually testing the code. You don't need to kind of deploy it to the server and simulate messages, simulate requests and stuff, because you do all of those simulations in the unit tests. So it helps do that a lot quicker, and it helps find bugs when making changes to code. So it helps improve the confidence of developers who are working with that code, because they know that unit tests have been written, and if the unit tests fail, then they know that the function or whatever isn't doing what it was before, and it may break dependencies and things like that. So basically, the two main things that can improve or reduce poorly written code in a project is peer reviews, if you can do that and you do have other peer developers, and tests, unit tests. Write unit tests, do peer reviews, and your code will be 100 times better than it was before. All right, the next question, or the next biggest frustration I have on the list, is from Adinaran. Apologies if I'm saying that name wrong. But they're a project manager, and their frustration is, due to where I am from, I would say electricity. Now, this is a really interesting one, and I'm fortunate that I live in London, where we don't have electrical outages and things like that. It's very rare that we would have the electricity would go down in our area. But I have worked briefly in South Africa, where they have lots of problems with electricity, where they have basically power outages all the time in places, and you basically can't rely on it as a thing. So, and I'm sure this is common in many places in the world. So what I would say, my advice for this is, if you can, get a generator as a backup. This will help you continue working when your power goes down, or you could just get a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply, that will give you like an hour of running when your power goes down. These are things that you can buy for your property or wherever you live. Another bit of advice would be you could get a laptop with a good battery that will allow you to continue working when your electricity goes out. Of course, it may mean you can't access the internet or something when the power goes out, but you should, I guess, be prepared. Make sure that you have any documentation or anything that you use frequently cached and downloaded on your local machine. It will help with that. And yeah, that's basically it. If anyone else has any advice for people that have problems with electricity, then please leave in the comments, because it seems like a few people have problems with that. The next frustration I have is from somebody called Guillermo. I think that's how you pronounce the name. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing any of these names. And they are a full stack developer. And their frustration is, with all the extensive options in programming language and frameworks, it is difficult to choose. Sometimes it is not choice but necessity, for example, job requirements. Added to that, there are constant updates to their respective SDKs. It really is a challenge to keep up. I would agree. There are constantly new frameworks, and the marketplace is pretty much saturated right now with frameworks and things. So it can be quite hard to learn everything, and it can be quite hard to figure out what you should focus on. Again, like they say in the question, a lot of it is necessity with job requirements. I guess there's not really much you can do about that. You have to learn what your job requires you to if you want to stay in that job. But my advice would be, again, like I gave in the kind of higher level advice of technology constantly changing, I would suggest, first of all, learn high-level programming languages. So yes, there are many JavaScript frameworks that come out all the time, but JavaScript itself, you can learn that, and you can learn that to a high level, which will help you learn the other frameworks and things faster. And the other piece of advice would be, yeah, just appreciate that as a developer, you're going to constantly need to be learning new things. If you want to be a good developer and you want to be in demand, you're going to need to accept that you're just going to have to keep learning new programming languages and new frameworks, and that's just the life of a developer. And focus on learning the skills required to learn new skills, as opposed to focusing on actually learning things and then feeling like it's wasted effort. By learning new things, you're practicing learning new things, and the more that you learn, the more you'll be able to learn faster. So the more frameworks you know, the more you'll be able to learn new frameworks quicker. All right, and finally, I have the last question I'm going to read out on this live stream, and it is from Alex, who is a student, and they say, my procrastination is ruining my life. Sorry to hear that, Alex. Procrastination is something that many people have to deal with in all different sectors, all different jobs, things like that. And yet, procrastination, I believe, affects everyone. I was procrastinating before doing this live stream. People procrastinate all the time. The only things you can do is just try different techniques that work for you to help overcome procrastination. Now, you need to accept that there's not going to be just one simple trick or hack or some technique that you can use that is going to solve your procrastination forever. You're going to constantly need to be trying new things. You're going to need to practice new things. An example could be practice focusing on just one thing at a time. Procrastination often occurs if you try and multitask too much. So try just be laser focused on one task, get that task done, and then move on to the next thing. Another piece of advice would be to try the Pomodoro technique, which is a technique I talked about earlier in this video, where you do 25-minute kind of sprints of work, and then you have a 5-minute break. But during that 25 minutes, you've got to be entirely focused on that one task. There are many different other procrastination techniques that you can look up online. Overcoming it, you could block different social media channels, turn notifications off on your phone. One thing I find really helps me is just removing my phone from the room completely. So having my mobile phone in a completely different room makes me, I would say, 20% more productive. So anytime I'm working, anytime I'm trying to focus on something, I always try and not have the phone in my room, let alone nearby, so it's not accessible. Okay, so I'm going to conclude that Q&A there. If you have any other frustrations or questions that you would like me to answer, and if you're watching live now, then feel free to ask in the live chat, or just leave it as a comment on this video, and I will aim to do another video answering other people's frustrations as soon as I have enough people give me questions. So I'll try and do another video that answers your question if you ask questions in the comments. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions or comments at all, please leave them in the comments. And please, if you want to get more updates of more of my videos that I do, please subscribe to this channel. And if you're also looking for updates of other blog posts and things that we put out, please subscribe to our mailing list, which we will put a link for in the notes of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.